In this video, I'll explain why you should be really excited about the recent Tesla Investor Day, even if you're not a fan of Teslas. I'll go through some of the practical examples of how Tesla continue to reinvent the vehicle manufacturing industry and how they're changing that entire industry. How owning an EV will soon be cheaper than owning a Toyota Corolla, and it's closer than you think, and what getting to a 100% renewable energy powered global economy looks like in the real world. Keep watching to find out why this shareholder meeting was more than just about electric vehicles. Hi, my name's Greg and welcome to Electric Car Australia, the Aussie YouTube channel for those wanting to learn a little bit more about electric vehicles and sustainable living technologies. If you're new to the channel, welcome, and please click that subscribe button and hit that bell icon. It really helps the channel out. And also a big thank you to our new Ko-fi supporter. Ken K's just signed up to our $1.99 a month Ko-fi deal. And also a big thank you to longtime Patreon supporter Di. If you'd like to join both Ken K and Di, you can check out the platforms below and also share in those extra benefits that Patreon and Ko-fi members get. So I don't normally do these news types of videos because there's other YouTubers out there that do a far better job than me, and I'm recording this very late at night, so excuse me if I sound a little bit doughy, but I thought this one was really important to go through. And believe it or not, this is the first time I've watched a full Tesla presentation and got really excited about it. And I'm not a Tesla fanboy. Most of my regular viewers will know that. I'm more the lower end cheaper market of the EVs. However, you've got to give credit where credit's due, and I was really excited after watching this presentation. So why did I think it was so good? Well, a big chunk of what they went through is actually happening today. So this is not pie in the sky stuff, all those future promises of far away new models and that sort of stuff. In actual fact, there was no new EV models disclosed or launched of the day, which is quite different to what Tesla normally do. Really, this was full of practical examples and demonstrated real life engineering across multiple areas, which is something I really like. And they also weren't just pandering to the bean counters and the accountants. They weren't looking at the next couple of financial quarters. So therefore, there was a few people around, if you look in the news and social media, that weren't overly happy with the Investor Day. So analysts didn't necessarily like it because they weren't talking up all big new launches and all this stuff that was happening in the future. And again, there was a few diehard Tesla fans, or fanboys as they're often called, that also weren't impressed because there was no big glamorous launches. Which is fine with me, and one of the other things that impressed me, we got to meet a lot of the other Tesla leaders. So as we all know, Elon Musk is the face of Tesla, but it's more than one man, and there's a lot of really highly educated and smart, dedicated people behind the scenes. And again, we got to meet some of those guys throughout the presentation. So what really struck me, this was a presentation from a company that is really starting to mature. Now, if there's people out there that didn't take Tesla seriously, I think they will now. And that comes from governments, politicians, industry players, and even the vehicle buying community. These guys have grown 27 times in size since 2016. So that gives you a bit of an idea of the size. But if we take a step back, in 2003, Tesla registered as a car manufacturer based in the US. Now, back then, the chairman, Elon Musk, he said that he thought Tesla had a 10% success rate in EVs. So compare that to where they are now with nearly 100,000 employees. Now, those numbers have grown 40% since 2020, and 65,000 of those employees are in manufacturing. So compare that to the Ford Motor Company. So globally, Ford have about 180,000 employees in total, and Toyota have 370,000. So Tesla is certainly on the way up. And they've got the capacity across their 4 current manufacturing plants to produce about 2 million EVs a year. So definitely worth taking seriously. And an example of people taking them seriously is Toyota. So in the same week as this Investor Day, Toyota stripped down a Tesla Model Y, and the feedback from Tesla publicly was that it was an absolute work of art. And as we know, Toyota has been a little bit slow getting onto the EV bandwagon, so I think that's a real compliment from Toyota. And of course, Tesla manufactures more than just EVs. They're into home and grid scale energy storage. They're into AI, robotics and automation. And we'll talk a little bit about that later in the video. Now, another thing about Tesla is they're not big on outsourcing. So they've always been a supporter of vertically integrating their operations and bringing more and more stuff in-house. So what that means is they're trying to design, develop, manufacture and sell as much of their own product as possible. And of course, the benefits of that is you've got total control over your supply chain and product quality. There's efficiencies, cost reductions, and the more you can scale that up, so the more you can produce, those numbers just get better. And an example of that is the number of software engineers they employ. So these are the guys down at the development and design stage. So they've got over 200 highly qualified software engineers just working on the full self-driving and autopilot functions of Tesla vehicles. And there's over 100 software engineers just working on chip design. And Tesla consistently is in the top 10 preferred suppliers for software engineers globally. So people really want to work there. So I've talked a lot about it, the Tesla Investor Day. I'll put a link in the show notes to the full program. Now it runs for about 4 hours in total, but there's probably about 3 hours of content in there. So it is very long. I believe it was the longest Tesla public presentation in history. But there was so much good stuff in there. I really encourage you guys to go and have a look. It's specifically talking about part 3 of Tesla's master plan. Now within that master plan, there's 10 parts that they talk about, and we'll look at some of those shortly and some of the really important examples. They also talk about how that master plan impacts on Tesla as a company. They go through some financials, obviously, and they have a Q&A. But the big chunk of it was those 10-part master plans, and that's where you show, that's where they showed where the rubber's hitting the road and just how they're changing the face of manufacturing and what that means for you and I. So to quickly go through those 10 parts, first part was vehicle design, and there's some fantastic stuff going on in that space, and one of the examples I've got talks about that. Number 2 was the powertrain. So again, leaps and bounds. They're way ahead of everyone else in the EV space in this powertrain area. Number 3 was electronic architecture. Again, I've got a great example to show you guys of that. Number 4 is software, obviously. Number 5 is self-driving, so they talk about that. Number 6, they talk about their robotics update. Number 7 is in the charging space, so what they're doing there. Number 8 is supply chain, so how they're driving efficiencies in supply chain and what that means for the company and the customer. Number 9, they look at manufacturing, and number 10, to close it out, they look at energy. Now this is the efficient manufacture of megapacks, and I'll also show you guys a quick little slide from the presentation which just shows how simple little changes can make such big difference. And they also talk a lot about how these megapacks and this energy storage division of Tesla is a big part of transitioning the world away from fossil fuels, and how total removal of gas peaker plants is possible with these large grid scale batteries. And on that note, they mentioned that they produce more power electronics than the global wind and solar industry combined. So that just goes to show how big they are in that energy space as well. So let's get back on track and look at the things that really got me excited in this presentation. Now, as I mentioned, this is not a detailed commentary on everything. There's other YouTubers out there that do a way better job than me on that. This is just the main takeaways from the day for me, and the things that I think could change your life. So this was the first big thing that hit me, the overall master plan. So this demonstrated a company and a group of really smart people who are thinking to the future. They're not just worrying about the accountants or the bean counters that want to hit the numbers over the next half or the next financial year. These guys are planning way into the future, and they're looking at how the entire globe can transform into a sustainable and renewable economy. So they've done the plan on this and they've mapped it out, and they believe that we'll need 700 million global EVs on the road to do the job. We'll need 115 terawatt hours of battery storage. Now that's vehicle and stationary storage batteries. We'll need 4 terawatts of solar and wind generation. And they've crunched the numbers on this and they believe it'll cost around $7 trillion. Now, when you hear that number, you nearly fall out of your chair. But if you put it in context, this is going to happen over a number of years. And when we think that we spend about $700 billion globally supporting the fossil fuel industry in subsidies, and that's only one industry, if we look at this globally, there's lots and lots of dollars that'll be able to be saved in certain areas and put towards this. So it's not like this is over and above all the money we're saving now. So this was one of the first things that really hit me. These guys are planning way out. And the second thing, once I started to get into the 10-part plan that really hit home, was that these guys are doing a lot of this stuff now, and then they clearly set out how they're going to improve even further. So the first example of this that really hit home for me was in part 1 in the vehicle design. So they showed a video of traditional vehicle manufacturing where all the body parts, etc., were stamped and then they were assembled, the doors were put on, then it was run through the paint shop and then the doors were taken back off to allow all the interior and the electronics to go in. Then the undercarriage would come up, so all your suspension parts and all that sort of stuff. And then the doors would go back on again, the glass would go in, and hey presto, you've got a finished motor vehicle. So what Tesla's done up to this point, they said, look, let's have a look. We think we can improve that. So in the Model Y, they started doing mega castings. So with your chassis, instead of having lots of things bolted together, they started to do these mega castings where you're pouring the metal in and you're making these big solid castings, and that allowed them to start bolting different parts of the vehicle together. And also they made the battery under the Model Y a structural component. So basically the battery forms the floor of the vehicles. And then the seats bolt onto that. And when you put that into the manufacturing plant, the big hole that's underneath the car, because it doesn't have a floor, allows that battery assembly to just slide up underneath, and it's a lot more simpler. So by doing that, they removed hundreds of parts, and every part that you have to bolt together is a failure point, and they saved approximately 10% of the production line time just by doing that. So then they talked about the next generation vehicles. So this one's only 1 or 2 years away, so it's not, again, way in the future. What this does, it breaks the production line into what I call chunks. So based on the mega casting type ideas that they've already got, they're breaking the vehicle into a front component, a passenger component, and a rear component. Now what that does, that allows the teams to be working on different chunks all at the same time, and then it just comes together at the end. So what that means for Tesla is that takes up a smaller footprint in the factory. So that production line doesn't take up as much space. So that means they can build that part of the factory quicker. The factory costs less to build that part, and they can get more cars through that production part when they build it. So what that flows through to is a 40% reduction in production costs. Now, obviously, they're going to keep a big chunk of that as profit, but you would also hope, and we'll talk a bit about this shortly, that that will flow down through to the customer in cheaper vehicles. So on that note of profit, it's known within the industry now that Tesla make on average about $10,000 profit per car, compared to about $2,000 for the other legacy automakers. Now, there's a lot that goes into that. They don't have dealerships and they don't pay commissions and all that sort of stuff. But $10,000 profit compared to $2,000 is a big difference. And of course, there's more than just cost and finances to a car. Safety is important. So by having that large battery and passenger cell together, that provides rigidity and allows for the other crumple zones front and back to be separate. So of course, for a number of years now, if you're in an accident in a Tesla, you're less likely to be injured than in any other car in the US, and that's already a fact. So that safety is only going to get better when we're looking at developments like this. And of course, the continuous improvement and efficiency goes well beyond just their vehicles. So these mega factories that they build these vehicles in, they're always looking to ways to improve the building of those themselves and everything that goes in it. So the robots, they're designing and building their own robots. There's teams of people that are continually looking to how they can improve that. And they're bringing as much as possible in-house. And we'll have a really good look at an example of how they're doing and what they're doing in that space. And it just is mind-blowing, the benefits of that. In talking about mega factories, they have announced their next one. So I believe this is number 5. This will be in Mexico. It'll be the biggest EV factory in the world, and they'll manufacture the batteries as well as the EVs all in the one factory. And that is going to be a game changer in this cheaper EV space. And while they didn't give too much away, they did basically say that that cheaper model Tesla is likely to be a couple of years away, and it will come out of this Mexico plant based on all the efficiencies they've learned up to this point in time. So this brings me to my second example of just how good these guys are getting. So the powertrain. So they're very close to producing a powertrain for an EV that costs $1,000 to manufacture. So that powertrain is like the electric motor and the gearbox, anything that goes together within a powertrain. So you consider that $1,000 to build that, compare that to an internal combustion engine or another EV. So goodness knows what that costs Ford or Toyota to currently make, but $1,000 for an EV one, that's going to be a game changer, and it's closer than you think. And of course, what helps them do that? Having all that IP in-house, or that intellectual property. So that's very valuable. And like I said, by bringing all that in-house with your own engineers, that continuous improvement, you can be tweaking things all the time. And that is what will allow these guys to stay well ahead of the competition all the time. So my third example that just blew me away was part of part 3 in the electronic architecture section. Now this specifically relates to the wiring harnesses. Now they showed the Model S wiring harness, so that's where they started years and years ago. They bought in all the controllers for that, all the smarts, the computers, the harnesses. And the problem with that was it was very complex, and if there was a problem or they needed to fix something, it was very hard to diagnose where it was, because it was just a mess of different software, controllers, processors, wiring, connectors. There was over 300 separate components. So they've looked at that and they've said, we've got to simplify this. We've got to make it cheaper, simpler, and also higher quality. So when they designed and built the Model 3 a couple of years later, they bought more of that stuff in-house, specifically related to this area. And there was about 56% of it that they actually designed and manufactured themselves in-house. Now the Cybertruck that they've told us will be on the roads later this year, there's about 85% of the components in this area have been bought in-house. So they've designed, manufactured that themselves, and what that's led to is a 17 kilo reduction in weight. So again, there's a cost to all that weight, so they've saved that money. It makes the cars more efficient. So these are the sorts of things where these guys have demonstrated they can do it. So of course they're not happy with that. So the next generation vehicle, which we mentioned before, is probably a couple of years away. They're looking at 48 volt architecture. So what we're talking about there is these are all the auxiliary stuff in your car. So your sound system, your power steering, your air conditioning controls, your headlights, all that sort of stuff that normally in most vehicles, if not all, passenger vehicles is 12 volt. It's 24 volt in trucks for obvious reasons, but these guys are taking a step change and they're looking at going 48 volts. So this is the sort of stuff where they're just changing entire industries. So they're going to bring 100% of these components in-house in this next generation vehicle, and that's going to allow them to use less wires, smaller wires, less copper, so that'll be cheaper. They'll be able to produce it quicker because the less components to fit together and put together, you can produce the cars quicker. So you can see by all these little examples, they all add up to huge benefits. And as I mentioned, this is going to change the industry, because if one car maker stops buying 12 volt components and they move to a 48 volt architecture, you can't tell me all the other car manufacturers aren't going to look at that, look at the advantages, and then they are going to start to pressure their suppliers that are currently supplying 12 volt gear to step up to 48 volt. So this, in the next few years, will change all auto manufacturers. So even if you're not a Tesla fan and you never drive a Tesla in your life, this will be one thing that will change for you. And that's the difference between the legacy guys who have been around for years. Ford started the production line, Henry Ford, about 101 years ago. And realistically, not a lot has changed in that production line. Tesla are pushing the boundaries and changing that production line. And they're changing lots of other things, whereas the legacy automakers have just tweaked little things, but not made massive step changes. So the fourth example I wanted to talk to you guys about was in part 9 or stage 9. So we've skipped a few, but this was a really important one. And I'm not going to talk about the car manufacturing here. I'm going to talk about the battery manufacturing. So it blew me away to see a slide where they were making batteries with dry powders. So for me, this looked like a toner cartridge putting toner onto an A4 sheet of printer paper. This thing was just spinning through and it was putting dry powder onto a foil ribbon type thing. This is at their Texas plant in America. So again, this is happening today. This is not future stuff. And what they're doing with that is making cylindrical cells. So once they make that ribbon, they roll that ribbon up to make one of their new cylindrical cells. There's about 3 meters of ribbon in that, so there's a lot of energy density in those cells. And then they will add an electrolyte later. So the cathode and the anode go in dry. They add the electrolyte later. Now, why are they doing this? Well, there's huge cost benefits to it, environmental benefits. Normally, battery manufacturing plants are bubbling and boiling away all these toxic chemicals. Because this is a dry process, that all goes away. And they can make it in-house. So that Texas plant, it's all in there. They're going to transfer that technology and know-how over to Mexico. So in one part of the plant, they'll be making the batteries. They'll move across to another part of the plant and they'll go directly into EVs. So if you're still with me, thanks for hanging in. And this is my last example of what really jumped out at me. And it was in part 10, the energy section. So the production efficiencies they've been able to get building these massive megapack grid scale batteries is amazing. And this graphic just really quickly shows how they've changed the design and the way these things go together. Again, they've bought a lot of this stuff in-house, so they've got total control over it and they can tweak it as they go. And as I've said before, all these little incremental changes, they really add up if you're saving time or production costs. And hopefully that flows through to the end user and we can share in some of those benefits. We talked about that battery manufacturing and how it's a unique process and they're bringing it into their own factories. They're not buying cells from outside providers. In the future, they're aiming to make all their own cells. So you think about it, if they make all their own batteries and they use those batteries across all their products, so whether it's their EVs, it's their home power wall, solar batteries that you put on the side of your house, or those mega packs, how they can control the costs, the manufacturing quality, the scale benefits. So it's just astronomical, the benefits that these guys will be able to get when they leverage the scale, which is really starting to ramp up. So I won't go through any more examples. They're the main ones that I really liked, and I think they're game changers for everyone really. What I'll do, as I mentioned, I'll put the link to the full presentation in the show notes. It's conveniently broke up into chapters, so you can look at those 10-part chapters and you can select the ones you want. You might want to go straight to the Q&A at the end. So really recommend that you guys have a look, even if you don't look through the whole thing, because as I mentioned, it is quite long. But I quickly wanted to mention a couple of other innovations that they've recently done and have already rolled out. So for those viewers that are familiar with the North American Tesla market, you'll know that Tesla does not use the CCS charge plug for rapid chargers like they do in the rest of the world. Over in North America, they use the North American Charging Standard. So what that means is that a non-Tesla can't charge at a Tesla charger. Now that was fine because originally that is what was intended. But now, as is happening a lot around the world, government money is being pumped into these charger companies. So because of that, they need to open up their charge networks to everyone. And what Tesla has done is allowed some of those chargers in America, as they have in Australia. We've got about 6 Tesla chargers open to other non-Tesla vehicles now. But back to America, they've opened some of the charge network. But what that meant was you would need an adapter to use a CCS car on a Tesla charger. So one of the innovations that Tesla has rolled out is something they call the Magic Dock. And I won't show a graphic of it, you can Google it if you want, but it's an ingenious little adapter that actually is locked into the charger. So if you turn up and you've got a Tesla vehicle, you pull the plug out as you normally would, and you plug into your Tesla and you charge, nothing different. If you've got a CCS, you turn up, you open the app, you unlock the charger, and when you pull the plug out, this little adapter locks onto the socket and stays on the socket, and you just plug into your CCS car. So this is an example of where Tesla really research and design and plan these things out. So for the consumer, the EV driver that rocks up to a charger, doesn't matter whether you've got a Tesla in North America now or a CCS, it's seamless. You just pull the plug out. So another example of something happening today. It's only recent, but this is where Tesla really excel at this sort of stuff. One thing they did mention in the video, very briefly, they were sort of skirting around the issue, but vehicle to load or vehicle to grid along those lines will be coming, and most likely in 2025. So that's something that Tesla owners will be really excited about. And more than likely, it'll probably just be an over-the-air software update. So everyone that's got a Tesla now without that functionality will probably within a couple of years have it out of the box. You won't need to do anything. It'll be just via a software update. So another one that I don't believe they talked about, but they slipped a photo in there. They've done a few of those little nuggets for anyone that was watching really closely to pick up, but is wireless inductive charging. So this, I think, will also be great for regular punters. You can forget about plugging in and unplugging and all that sort of stuff. You'll just drive into your garage. There'll be a wireless charging pad on the floor of your garage, charger on the wall, and the car will just communicate and it'll just do its thing. So if you're interested in that, go and have a look at the video and keep your eye out for that one. And that's it. And I'm glad about that because it's getting a bit hot in here. I didn't put the aircon on because sometimes it can be a bit noisy. So look, what did you guys think? Do you think what we've talked about today is going to change your life or change the life of your friends, family, or kids? Leave your comments in the show notes. I'd really like to hear what you thought. If you enjoyed the video, give it the big thumbs up. And if you want to flick us a couple of dollars as a donation, you can click that super thanks there at the bottom of the screen. Also, another big thank you to our subscribers and Ko-fi and Patreon supporters. Really appreciate you guys helping us out. And don't forget to check out the links in the show notes because There's lots of other interesting stuff in there to read if you want to have a bit more background on some of those things. And as I mentioned, there's chapter notes in the Tesla video, so you can go straight to the one you want to check out. So until next time, take care, stay safe, look after your friends and family, and we'll talk soon.